So the first day back to school after that, in the first class, I got in trouble. That's maybe 20 or 30 minutes into the very first class of the day. I had my grandfather's driver's license sitting on the desk, and my teacher stops in the middle of class and asks me what that is. And I tell her it's a driver's license, and then she continued to tell me how I wasn't old enough to have a driver's license and that's having a fake ID and she was going to have to take it. And I said, "You're not going to take it from me. That's not going to happen." And she said, "Whose driver's license is it?" And at this point, I was mad. And so I said, "It's Mickey Mantle's driver's license." Instantly, she flipped out, told me to leave her class. So I left her class, got down to the principal's office. She told me that essentially I was suspended, and I was like, "That's not fair." And she didn't care, even though I explained what happened. She didn't care, so I was suspended. So after a week, I go back to school. The first day back to school, in the first class, the same teacher stops in the middle of class and decides she wants to pick on my necklace because it was a bullet necklace that my grandfather had made when he was in Vietnam. And so she got mad and said that I wasn't allowed to have a bullet in school because I could use it to kill someone. Mind you, this is a necklace. She stops, tells me that if I don't leave the class and go to the principal's office or give her the bullet, that they'll have to call the police in there and the whole class will get locked down. So I'm like, "I'll just leave." So I left, went to the principal's office. They said the same thing. They gave me the choice. You either give me the necklace or you can get suspended. So I chose being suspended. So once again, I was out. So me and Jordan had built this quarter pipe off of the stairs on the back of our house, or my house. We had been dropping in on it all day. I was in the house and I got this idea that it was dark outside and we had this floodlight in the backyard, and I thought it would just look cool. So I asked my grandmother to take the camera and go stand out in the yard and video me. She gets out in the yard, I tell her to go ahead and start recording. She says she's recording. As soon as I go to drop in though, there's a dog running across. This dog that my grandmother had gotten right after my grandfather died because she thought we needed new life in the house. And so this little dog comes running across. And so I bailed thinking that I would land soft enough to not hurt myself and at least wouldn't come down and like run over this dog. Well, instead, I actually just ended up falling 9 or 10 feet onto concrete on the elbow that I had previously injured twice when I was a kid. And when I hit the concrete, I knew it. And so like I kind of just sat up and I tried to pick this arm up, like move it, and it didn't move. And I was like, so I picked my arm up with my right hand and picked it up, and when I let go, it dropped back down. And I instantly was like, "Oh, great." My grandmother comes running in. She's, "Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I tell her, "No, I think we're going to have to go to the hospital. I'm pretty sure it's destroyed." The x-ray technician doesn't listen. I'm trying to tell him, like, trying to explain to him, like, I literally cannot move my arm. And he gets frustrated and walks over and just, slams my arm flat down onto this, like, x-ray machine. And I went off on him. And they didn't even have an orthopedic, like, surgeon that could handle something like that at the ER. So they gave me a sling that night and 2 Tylenol with codeine and told me good luck, basically. She called where her husband used to work. They put us in touch with somebody in Maryland that was an orthopedic doctor. That person put us in touch with a specialist because of how bad my fracture actually was. We go and meet him. His name's Dr. Kang, and he was adamant that this was going to be the hardest surgery he ever had to do. He was really confident I was never going to have the same mobility in my arm again. And he was slightly concerned that it might not get fixed and there might not be any using it ever again. And so yeah, they planned on a 2 to 3 hour surgery. We went up, they go to do the surgery, and it ended up taking 5 or 6 hours. And one, my arm on the left side has not grown in length anymore since then because I smashed the growth plate. 2, they had to move my funny bone, so that nerve actually runs along the inside of my arm now. 3, I cannot straighten my left arm out all the way. I can straighten it out, but there's a very noticeable bend in it no matter what I do. School, knowing that I was going to be out for at least a few months, probably the rest of the year, they decided to have a teacher who lived close bring me my schoolwork to the house every day. And she was going to pick up the work from all my teachers every day and then drop it off in the mornings. The first day came that she was supposed to come, and she came and explained that none of the teachers had any work for her. They totally had forgotten that they were supposed to do that. And so the next day comes around, she comes, none of the teachers had any work. They weren't even there at the end of the day to meet her. And that basically continued the entire time. So by this point, me and that had broken up, and I started dating this girl, Harley, that I had a crush on since 2nd grade when I met her, honestly. And we had been friends the whole time, but it never really, neither one of us wanted to make the move, or I don't know what happened. I decided that I wanted to, finally make that move, and it worked out, and we started dating. So by the time I ended up going back to school, I was basically like, I don't even care anymore. And the day that I got to school, there was an SOL test that I had to take because I had already missed it. The SOL test essentially decides whether you pass the grade or not. Knowing that I had basically missed half of the year, I expected that I was going to fail this test because nobody cared. I go straight into the school, and they cut me off, and I go down to the guidance counselor, and then he takes me to the library so I can do this SOL test. I do the test, which I actually ended up passing. The class that I was supposed to go to was home ec. And so I walk into the class, and the teacher starts out with a snobby comment, like something along the lines of, "Oh, nice of you to join us, even though you're late," or something like that. I explained to her I was taking the SOL test. Like, I just got back to school after being out for like the last couple months. You could tell this was the first time that basically I had the teacher, and you could tell that like she obviously had a problem with me right off the bat. So I was like, cool. I like explained like I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing here. And she said, well, if you had been here all year, you would have known. And I once again explained it's not my fault. I wasn't here. Like, I didn't just skip school, right? And she said something along the lines basically of there's no excuses. And I snapped on her. And as I snapped on her, the bell rang. So I was like, I don't even care. And I got up and walked out of the room. The result of that was I ended up getting in trouble. And so my grandmother decided at that point to just pull me out of school for the rest of like 2 weeks that was left. And she decided that I wasn't going to be going back to that school. So summer 2006. Okay, so at this point it was extremely weird for me. I started to get like a kind of an idea of what was going on, but still didn't know how to like process it or like what anything meant. So yeah, things were really weird. And so right at the beginning of summer, me and Jordan were hanging out. There was this other kid who we're going to call Urkel. He was over, and then Jordan had one of his friends, and we were all hanging out at my house. We had this little concrete pad where we would skateboard and stuff like that. So we were like hanging out there. Urkel came out of nowhere as I was doing this skate trick and smashes this like plastic toy gun over my like back and like neck and like side of my face, kind of. It like wrapped around me. Me and him are fighting. It wasn't much of a fight. Neither one of us actually landed any decent hits or anything. But yeah, we got into this like fight that lasted like 5-10 minutes. Yeah, that was my first fight with Urkel. So I was going to the dirt bike track a lot that summer, and I was actually getting pretty good to the point that people were starting to get mad, and some of the adults were actually complaining to my grandmother that they didn't want me to ride when the adults were riding because of this or that or whatever. But reality is that it didn't start that way until I started being able to beat them around the track. So that led me to doing more stunts than racing. At this point, I was starting to film everything, or as much as I possibly could. And so the first like stunts and skits that we did were honestly more like stupid things. So for example, I had this little skit where I had a literal raw, uncooked, frozen shrimp and a metal statue of a duck, and it was a 3-minute video of the duck talking to the shrimp and then eating it. We would go to shortstop across the highway there in Melfa, and Jordan would go in front of me, and he would get in the aisles, and he would pull his pants down so his like was hanging out, and then he would walk around the store that way, and then the dirt bike stunts started, and things like amped up a little bit. I started trying to do freestyle tricks, which led to a bunch of crashes and stuff. Nothing major ever though, and that's kind of how like all of the stunts started for us. So come 7th grade, my grandmother decided that I didn't have any choice in it, and I was going to this private academy, Broadwater, and she told me that my hair was just a little bit too long and that I had to get just an inch or two cut off for their dress code. And so I wasn't happy about it, but I decided, okay, whatever. After my hair was cut, I found out that it was gonna be really short. Honestly, I hated the school before I even got to the school. Yeah, that led to me trying to find excuses to like get out of going to school. Like I would purposely fall as hard as I could in the shower, or I would fake being sick, or whatever excuse I could come up with to not have to go to school that day, right? And the school constantly harassing me to play football for them, and I would have to turn them down all the time. Eventually, the school and my grandmother came to an agreement for the school to give my grandmother all of her money back that she had spent, even for the time that I was there, give her everything, all of it back, to just have me leave their school. So she decided to put me back at Nandua. Well, before I even got there, my grandmother told me that the principal had told her that there was a rumor that if I had come back to the school, that somebody was going to try and fight me the first day that I got back to the school. And so I was like, great, I'm getting out of the car to go get like beat up? Like what? Urkel comes and sits down, and I had put it together at this point what was happening. He comes and sits down from another complete table on the opposite side of the room, right, like diagonal, but like pretty much right across from me. And so I asked Urkel if he was planning on trying to fight me, and he said yeah. And so I stood up at the lunch table in the cafeteria and said, if you want to fight me, I'm right here. And I guess I said it loud enough that the whole cafeteria went silent for one, and that put all of the spotlight on him, and so he couldn't back down at this point. So he stood up, and I was like, okay, bet. So I walked around the table, and he started walking towards me a little bit. And when we met, he tried to swing, and when he swung, I just barely dodged it, but I dodged it, and I caught him with one right to the fucking jaw. About that same time, I'm getting grabbed from behind. Well, it turns out it was the principal had grabbed me from behind. And now I'm literally in a headlock. I'm being choked out by the principal. And like he's like kind of lifting me off the ground a little bit in this headlock. And me and Urkel are still just swinging as hard as we can at each other. So I grabbed Urkel with my left hand by the neck, and I forced my way back down to the ground, and then I forced Urkel like onto the table on his back, and I started just like, I mean, really just giving him everything I could right in his face. And like I'm literally gasping for air, but still just rocking this kid. I don't even know if he was conscious at this point. I was trying to stop, but the principal was still choking me out. So I like broke free from him, and as soon as I broke free, I turned around and caught him in the temple with an elbow and walked off like nothing had happened, just walked off. And by the time he had got there, I had already used his phone and called my grandmother and told her that I was being suspended. So about this time, I made a pretty big mistake, I would say. I had met this girl, Brittany, and I started really getting into her. And I was dating Harley. So it was a problem. And so I didn't want to cheat. That wasn't something I wanted to do. So I did the right thing and told Harley that I thought we needed to end it, and then told Brittany that I wanted to date her. And she was about it, and we started dating, and we dated for quite a while, actually. At this point, I was getting in trouble in school so often that the school and my grandmother both came to the conclusion that I needed to just be homeschooled. And so I felt like I was kind of forced to be homeschooled. But on the other hand, I was kind of happy and like thrilled about it because it eliminated the main problem that I felt I was having at the time. Even though there was a lot of other things going on that I still wasn't fully understanding or had like my head wrapped around yet. At the time, that seemed like the biggest issue. So when I started homeschooling, I actually finished all of my 7th and 8th grade work in like 2 weeks. And my grandmother was like, "How did you do it? How did you do it? How did you do it?" Well, it was an online school. And so I was able to get into their website and just look up the answers for every test. So I literally just copy and pasted the answers